Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on understanding advanced persistent threats, brought to you by Invary. I'm Jason Rogers. I'm the CEO of Invary. I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. For those of you who may be new to Invary, we leverage cutting-edge runtime integrity technology based on innovations that we license from the NSA to ensure that the foundational layers of a system remain uncompromised and secure at runtime. Today's session is going to focus on one of the most challenging areas of cybersecurity, advanced persistent threats, or APTs. So we'll be exploring how these sophisticated threats operate in the wild, their evasion techniques that they use to bypass traditional security controls, and most importantly, how organizations can detect and defend against them using runtime integrity. So this session is going to feature a live demonstration and dialogue on an APT in action, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. We encourage you all to submit questions via the Zoom Q&A interface, and we'll address as many as time allows us. So please note there's no audio or video on your side, so if you do have a question, please use that Q&A feature. I'm excited to welcome our guest today, Bryan Smith. Bryan is the founder of FNX Labs and former technical director at the NSA. He brings a wealth of experience in understanding and countering advanced threats. I'll let Bryan share a bit more about his background and expertise as we get started here. Bryan?
Yeah, long-time information security professional, back when there weren't really a lot of jobs in security. So started with the government, which was the place to go. And that really, I think, led to the trajectory of my career. Stayed in it, love it, passion, and like to build solutions and work with folks like you, Jason. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Bryan. Thanks for being here. Bryan also supports Alexander Cyber, ACS Solutions, is another partner of Invary, so we appreciate them loaning us Bryan for today for this. So Bryan, I think a good place to start for the audience is just a brief introduction into APTs. What are they, the origins? Do you want to start us off there?
Yeah, certainly. When we talk about APTs, we're talking about well-resourced, whether that's funding, technology, people, all the above, well-resourced groups that have a particular objective, right? This isn't the smash and grab target of opportunities. This is a more targeted agenda that's going after either specific information that they want to collect for espionage, position themselves for some future attack, or just have a long-term presence. So that long-term presence is going to layer those technologies that bring stealth, bring persistence, into the realm, and very difficult to find, more difficult to do attribution, complex.
Very good. And why would an adversary, I think this is somewhat obvious, but why would an adversary employ an APT in their attack? Like, what are they actually trying to do by using them?
Yeah, so certainly hide their presence with malware or sophisticated implants. They want to hide their presence. They want to steal information, which could be data, confidential or even classified data. You look at Salt Typhoon, right, which most recently hit the telecom infrastructure. Attacks of that level that then permeate across all different kinds of telecommunication systems is, I think, a great example of an APT.
And why they're doing it. For us, we see a lot of what I would call broad and deep extortion attacks. A lot of ransomware might happen on a targeted single machine. These are actors after all of your system or a huge chunk of it. So they're going to use APTs to hide for a while until they can move laterally wherever they need to move, find all the things they need to find before they execute that wide-ranging extortion attack. And then, last but certainly not least, the disruption factor.
Yeah.
So recently I spoke to a bunch of rural healthcare executives about, they need to be careful of their infrastructure. Disrupting healthcare across a wide swath of a particular country could be in the best interest of some of the adversaries that are out there. So we want to make sure that we're keeping our systems clear of these things, and we can guarantee sort of no broad spectrum disruption, telecommunications, healthcare, power, you name it. make sure that we have control over those systems. I guess to that end too, Bryan, in your view and your experience, how prevalent are APTs and maybe what is the increase in their usage over time?
Well, I think the cost to conduct an attack like this, I think everyone has figured out that cyber attacks for attackers anyway are relatively inexpensive. So they become the tool of choice for those resourced organizations. So instead of an expensive human campaign or satellite type system, the computer exploitation business is easy for anyone to get into the game. As a result, almost everyone on Earth, whether it's a state-sponsored actor or a financially motivated criminal group, they're going to be resourced to conduct this type of criminal activity.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing an increase in their use, especially on the Windows side, and a lot of these even small ransomware payloads,
Mhm.
just giving them the time that they need to attack just the right way. So for sure, definitely used against anybody,
Mhm.
often used in almost every attack. So the APT we're going to demonstrate today is one that the team here in Invary has created for testing and demonstration purposes. It is based on a great many things, in part on some APTs that have been disclosed by the NSA and the FBI, so Drove or Rub for one. Um, some elements of it pulled from open source, some from our own experiences. And again, like I said, we've modified it for safety and for testing. And we'll talk through that as we go into the demonstration. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. And Bryan, you can see that okay, correct?
Yes.
Gotcha. And if anybody on the attendee list is having issues seeing that, please let us know and we'll address that. So the environment we're going to be working today, this is a Debian virtual machine. It has a modern, well-known endpoint protection service running on it, who I won't name. Also has Invary running on it, and here at the end we'll actually show Invary detecting all the bad things that we're going to do. And one of the reasons that we run, these endpoint protection services is to really demonstrate that much of our security stack is reliant on the operating system and the kernel to be okay, and really can affect verification of that. So they're working off this assumption, sort of violation of zero trust, that I can trust the operating system to tell me what's going on, therefore I can do my job. So we like to, often demonstrate, test, against those solutions. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to implant our APT. I'm going to talk about this real quick. So first thing to know, I'm not a super user yet on the system. I do happen to know a sudo password. In our experiences, I had this rootkit, this APT sitting on disk forever. Isn't really flagged by any of these endpoint protection services. So it's not in their library. This is often the case with APTs. They don't have a signature. Maybe we haven't seen the behaviors before. The second thing to note is when I implanted it, also it won't pick it up. There's a couple things to maybe dig into here as well. For testing purposes, we often will use a module that we'll insert. But more often than not, when an attacker is after implanting an APT, they're going to go through an in-memory attack chain. What that means is, they're not necessarily getting you to download a file and click on it, although that is certainly an entry point. They're finding vulnerabilities in your attack surface that get them into some part of your runtime environment, and from there, worming their way down to the kernel. But Bryan, maybe now's a good time to talk about implantation, techniques from your perspective. I mentioned a couple, there are several more, but any thoughts on how implants work here?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the in-memory attacks are definitely, I would say, fairly common now, to where a lot of endpoint detection products were only looking at data that was at disk or on disk. So catching that, write to disk looking for that signature instead of a particular behavior, or being able to do things that I believe you're going to be walking through on the kernel. Um, that side of it is definitely key, and that's even from phishing or even a remote exploitation. You're going to have basically that pivot of whatever exploit is then going to trigger some write to memory. That write to memory is then going to elevate privilege. Elevate privilege is then going to layer in whatever command and control infrastructure they're going to need to then add further payloads to that presence.
And we're going to see a bunch of that here in a second. And as you mentioned, one of the reasons Invary focuses on verifying the kernel in memory is just that. So, we've seen systems, I might have kernel lockdown, file IMA, read-only boot image. I do all the right things, secure boot at boot time. But the first nanosecond that system is operational, it's vulnerable again. And so, your assumption of the state that you started in isn't always the state that it continues in. And we're there to provide continuous validation that that state of that system isn't changing, only doing what it's supposed to be doing. And really, for us, it actually, by verifying the behavior, allows us to find any APT, because we're not looking for it, we're looking for its impact on the system. So very powerful for us to be able to find ones that were created a nanosecond ago using AI. Doesn't matter. If it's attacking your system in memory, we're going to find it because it's going to alter its behavior. So not so fun anymore. We implanted a rootkit. No big deal. The first thing I'm going to do is do privilege escalation. And I see in the chat a question. If you want to promote that to the Q&A section, easier for us to kind of watch that. I'm happy to answer it there, although I'll bring it in now. The question is, the living off the land techniques. We talked about several different, implantation techniques, but can you talk a little bit more about living off the land, Bryan, and what that means?
Yeah, exactly. So another way to work around a lot of these different endpoint protection products is to essentially use legitimate features of the operating system, and that might be on the Windows world WMI. It might be your Active Directory, your different capabilities, PowerShell that are legitimate ways of communicating, but then if used by a compromised account or a malicious individual, could do nefarious things. I think what we typically see in these complex attacks is they're persistent beachheads or footholds inside of the organization are going to have more of a traditional implanted presence, malware presence. And then as they work laterally through the network, they may use those living off the land techniques. I mentioned Salt Typhoon. Volt Typhoon was heavily on the living off the land techniques to have the low and slow, not a lot of visualization or visibility into that activity.
Absolutely. Reminds me a little bit too of SolarWinds and some of the articles that are out there about it. Like, it was able to hide itself in the printer environment and then expand back into the system, so that you think it's gone, it's in your printer as it comes back.
Yep.
Very similar. So for our APT here, I have command and control over it because the APT itself has hooked the kill command. So I'm actually going to start to talk to my rootkit to tell it to do things by sending signals through the kill command. So I'm not actually killing a process or using kill how it was intended. I'm using it to talk to that element now of the operating system that me as the attacker own and control. Typical command and control, they're going to want remote connectivity. There are lots of different ways to do it. But they want to be able to receive data, tell it to move, do different things. So there's always some sort of operational activity where they can communicate with that APT, with that system on an ongoing basis. Any thoughts there, Bryan, on other command and control techniques?
Yeah, I think something through the console is definitely one way. There's going to typically be a combination maybe of um, some process that's listening for certain commands. Certain port knocking is an older example, but as a way of saying, hey, I'm communicating over here, and then I'm going to pass my channel over to this other side and send commands over the network, or even file based, DNS based, all sorts of ways of introducing commands into the environment.
A lot of piggybacking
Yep.
on existing infrastructure that's there.
Yep.
There's some good descriptions of that out there, and I mentioned this was based on Drover Rub. It had external command and control, and by the time we're done here, you'll see kind of a little bit about maybe how they did that, or at least the elements that gave them the ability to do that at the end. So, well, back to the attack here. I want privilege escalation, and so because now my APT controls the kernel, I'm telling it to take the current user that I'm logged in as and escalate my privileges. So it does this in a way where if an EDR is listening for the signals around privilege escalation, it won't find it. All of those are suppressed. Obviously, I'm using, who am I here? Again, because we modified this so I can demonstrate it. We wouldn't really even be able to do that or get the right answer out of that. So I think it's obvious, but again, the first things we like to tell people, once it's in there, I can do anything, but the first thing as an attacker I want to do is have that privilege escalation so I can do more things with that. The second thing that I think a lot of us make an assumption on is that I can trust the logs that are coming out of the system. I pull them into a SIM, a log aggregator. I'm using, CNAPs are big users of logs. And so, can I trust that source of data? Well, if I have an APT implanted, I'm in control of what you see in those logs. So in this example, this is the kernel message log on this machine. And right now it's actually happily telling me everything that my rootkit is doing at the kernel level. But I can send a message and have it obfuscate that. Now, obviously, a real attacker is going to change all those to nothing to see here. They'll redact, replay, whatever they need to do. But really, this is to kind of open our eyes that we have to validate the source of truth for the information that we're trying to act on. And if I can't verify that that system I got the log file from can be trusted, I have to assume that it's been compromised and I'm not seeing the entire picture. Any thoughts on log manipulation, Bryan?
Yeah, I think covering tracks, right, is going to be some of that first step again. So, elevate privilege, begin to cover tracks, make sure that logs and any other kind of initial forensic activity doesn't point to that implant. The other part too is I think this is a key example that most applications that are going to be used for security or even for monitoring of the system, right? Those APIs depend upon that kernel integrity to actually provide real information. And once that kernel has been compromised, by either that in-memory attack or a malicious kernel module driver, any of the information that your API is going to provide back to your application is not necessarily truthful.
Yep, absolutely. The next three things I'm going to do here are really about, now that I have control over the kernel of the system, I now want to deploy other types of malware or nefarious activities without detection. So the first thing we like to demonstrate is placing common malware on the disk, but hiding it and not having it be detected by an endpoint security product. So in this particular case, I'm going to use the ICAR file. So for those that don't know, it is a sample virus that has a definition in it that nearly all security applications on the planet know to recognize as a piece of malware and alert on it. And so typically, if I don't have control over the APT, and I write this ICAR file, it's going to throw a warning, say, hey, there's a high severity virus malware on the machine. But again, because I have control over the kernel now, I've written that file to disk, but if I check the contents of that particular directory, I don't see it. I have a little cheat sheet for the demo. I have a couple scripts that I've been using. And I have the script I used to actually grab the file, but I don't see it. But if I directly ask for the bytes, it's actually there in the directory. Now, again, a real attacker wouldn't let you do this either. Often they're going to create their own file system, maybe a file system only they know how to read and write to and its location. And they're manipulating those kernel structures in memory that kind of chain the directories and files together. And they're just taking things out. They're like, that doesn't exist for you anymore. And the U is not just a user in the console, it's any system making inquiries as to what's on that disk or getting alerts when new files are written. The iNotify events that come out, those are all suppressed. So in effect, what I've done here is I've put a piece of user space malware on this machine, and it's not detectable by your current security stack. Only again, because I'm in control over what that security stack sees and does from that perspective. Any thoughts on that, Bryan?
Yeah, and again, I think tying that together with the API side, attackers aren't going to use those normal APIs that are typically going to list or write or read. They can go around that. They can modify things directly to the physical disk. So yeah, once you have kernel, the system is done.
Yeah, absolutely. They kind of take it to the next level. Then I want to run this thing. I want to hide the fact that it's running. So if I get to the right screen here, make that a little bit easier to read. So I'm going to look for my bash process. So this is the root one that I was escalated to just a minute ago. Normally I can use this technique I'm about to do to hide any process. I'm just going to use my console here as an example. So again, I'm going to send my rootkit signal and say I would like for nobody to know that process exists in the world. So this is my root shell. So if I do that, I'm not killing the shell. Obviously, I'm still here, still typing in it. It and any of its dependents go away, and I can't see it. Same thing with the files, really kind of the same attack vector as well, is I've just told anybody who's looking that these things don't exist. I, as the APT, remember that they're there and how to get to them in memory, but nothing in the system can find them. And also those events that are generated, when the process gets started and eventually hidden, those are suppressed. So now I've got a piece of malware I've downloaded and I've just executed it, and it's running resident in memory, but still invisible to everybody on the system. Thoughts on that, Bryan?
Yeah, I think hiding processes as well as even your they could even implement a full separate TCP/IP stack to where now they're communicating on a completely different pathway than what any of the other security tools are going to be looking for.
Yeah, and good time I think to re-mention. You mentioned this earlier in the webinar. You might be thinking these are pretty sophisticated implementations of an attack. These things are available for small amount of funds for anybody to use illegally, so don't do it. But on the dark web and things, like you don't have to start from scratch here, and almost nobody is. So they're readily available out there. And I know we're constantly after making that not be a true statement, but lots of people have access to these things without having to create them from scratch. It's another reason for us to, I think, pay more attention to them.
I think that's especially true for the criminal organizations, the ransomware groups. Yeah, the people that are often conducting those operations and campaigns are not necessarily, and oftentimes not, the same ones that are writing the tools and techniques. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now that I have a file, a piece of malware on the system, and now I run it, it's going to have some network activity, and I want to hide that as well. So here, what I'm going to do to simulate this is look at ports that are open for Invary. So This is my Invary's appraiser running on this system. And again, we'll get to that here in a little bit. I'm going to use it as an example of something. So it's currently listening on 7386. And so I am going to tell my APT, I would rather people not know that I am there. So I send it that, and I go back in, and you see it's been removed from the list. So I had 2 entries before. There are 2 ports we talked to for different reasons, and that particular one that I picked out, 7386, is not there. Still running, still taking packets. And in fact, if you read the FBI and NSA's article on DroverHub, they talk about how it attacks the net filter process, which does a lot of the packet inspection for firewalls. And the key here is what's happening, put malware on, execute it, it's all hidden. Now I can start to exfiltrate data over the network plane, but remain hidden, especially if I've compromised the exfil path. So anything that's looking at these packets, if I have control over those systems, I could be like, those packets don't exist, like a Sith Lord, perhaps, to use a Star Wars reference. And no webinar is good without a Star Wars reference. Yeah, any more thoughts on the network, and maybe tie that back to command and control and those techniques too?
Yeah, I know you're breaking a lot of this down individually so that all the participants can really see this, but all of these things would probably happen within a few seconds. So once that attacker comes back, and again, not necessarily to specifically operate on this machine, but to further pivot and invade the rest of the network, all of that activity is hidden from the file system, the network, any additional process or kernel module. All of that now becomes hidden for any time that attacker comes back to continue their activity.
Yeah. And that's what you said there's key. It all happens instantaneously. The other thing, we've seen APTs set up home environments, I'll call them. And so anything I drop into a particular location on disk automatically takes on these capabilities. So I can never find the file, I'll never see the process. So anything that goes in that area adopts those capabilities and are free and clear. So it helps them move even faster when they do this. It's almost like setting up a pseudo system or a sort of a mini kernel VM that's separate from the rest that you never get to see on your system. A ghost computer on your real computer. It's pretty scary at that point.
Yeah.
A lot of our techniques that we've been using have been, attacking certain kernel functions and planting ourselves in between those. They kind of take a look at that. I'm going to look at the root. I don't know that sudo. I'm going to look at the VM stat functions here. And then we have made this guy, strong number, aware to go and hook those guys. So again, it's attacker, I'm not going to say hijacked, but just showing you really anything in the kernel available for me to now take advantage of and sit in the middle of and direct traffic for. Common things that are hijacked, Brian, any thoughts on those?
I think you're typically going to see, of course, process, file, network. If there are security tools that are installed, they might be neutered, so that it looks like they're running, but really they're no longer running. Again, it's the whole your maintenance window looks fine, but everything is not fine, or the loop of the security camera that's really just replaying the same few frames. That same kind of mentality of when we're on the system, we're going to make everything look normal. We're going to make everything look like there's no additional resources being leveraged, but really that's not the truth behind the scenes.
Absolutely. Last but not least, Windows drivers, Linux kernel modules. I actually use the kernel module to implant the APT. Again, that's not normal, just used for ease of testing and demonstration. But once I have access to the kernel, I might want to implant additional kernel drivers and avoid kernel lockdown and avoid detection. So what this is going to show is this is actually our APT, which we happily call Rogue. And I'm going to send the signal now to it to say, let's not tell people about ourselves. So it's not there anymore. Again, this will be more instantaneous. Once I have control of the kernel, I can now implant the driver. I can suppress, lock down other aspects of the system, and then hide its activity again nearly instantaneously. So I can do additional functions, or even make myself look like other drivers that are out there if you're not paying attention to it at the end of the day. All right, so just going through my notes, at this point, I think everybody's probably getting the concept here, but APT on disk not picked up, implantation not picked up. Once there, putting malware on disk, running it, network activity, and additional hijacking of the system, all unawares to that. And then again, what Invary brings to the table here is we're actually looking at kernel memory. So I'll give you another example of a common technique. Like most people would think like I can hook the syscall table, which basically means if there's a function out there that says, give me the files in this directory. There's kernel code that does that. And there's an array that says, hey, when I make that function call as a user, it points to a piece of memory and says, go run that code. And traditional approach is an attacker will go inject themselves in the middle and say, no, call me first. I'll call it. I'll redact what I do. But there are lots of layers to the kernel. So as an example, an interrupt, when you in user space want to make a call, sometimes you'll generate an interrupt in the kernel to then call that system call. Well, that interrupt process can also be hooked to a point where I can be like, right before you even get to the syscall table, let me get in front of that and take control over what's going to happen from here on out in the kernel. So we look at about 1 million data points out of running kernel, form a graph out of those. So we kind of look at it in what we call constellations, or little parts that really shouldn't change, even as the operating system runs, as compared to a baseline that we have of that system. So even though it's quite complex and lots of different attack vectors in the kernel, really any place where an attacker can get to disk, memory, network, what have you, we're able to detect and protect. Why I'm getting set up here to actually show an Invary report, Bryan, maybe, talk about the manual detection of these things. How can people go look for them themselves, evidence that they may or may not be there?
Yeah. One of the best ways, and some security products are doing this. As I mentioned earlier, if the kernel has been tainted, or compromised in some way, again by a kernel module, an in-memory exploit, Windows device driver, or equivalent, again, that particular function, that particular API that I'm going to call as a software developer is going to essentially lie back to my application. But I might be able to look at a variety of those, right? I might be able to ask the same question 3 or 4 different ways, and maybe the attacker is only hooked 2 or 3. And if I see some redundancies, I see some inconsistencies in that information, I might have some sort of sense that, hey, something's not right. This looks like this has potentially been compromised. The other side is also all the other out of band techniques. So looking at, again, I might not be seeing the particular traffic on one device, but am I seeing a high degree of volume of traffic elsewhere, right? So how can I correlate activity that is indicating, hey, something's not right that's being reported over here, but I'm seeing the balance of that information elsewhere.
Yep, all that makes sense. For sure. And I think, a companion to that is always attacking your assumptions. What have I assumed about this thing when I'm looking at it? How could that have not be true anymore? And how do I go validate that it is? I find it also an interesting approach for an organization to prioritize their cybersecurity efforts in and of itself, right? So look at my attack surface and document my assumptions and document how I verify those. And that'll tell you, oops, I'm making some pretty big assumptions here, there, and there. Then you can prioritize the ones that have, more uh, confidential data, what have you, implement your controls, verify your controls, rinse, wash, and repeat
Yep.
to get to a system that you have a better sense of. We'll look at an Invary report here in just a second and talk about it. And we have a couple other comments, but we're getting close to the Q&A section. So if you guys that are here live with us have a question, please don't hesitate. Drop one into the Q&A button on the webinar or in the chat. I've got them both up now, so happy to do that both. Well, let's take a quick look at an Invary appraisal. So this is a JSON file. So we have a visualization of this as well, but because we're here in the CLI, we're going to look at the JSON structure. So again, what we're doing is throughout the life cycle of this machine that's running, we're constantly measuring the kernel in memory. So we're gathering a bunch of data points, organizing them, comparing that against a baseline and saying, hey, are any of these behaviors violated? Behaviors meaning is the linkage between the amount of items in the syscall table, the function pointers, the area in memory, the code sequences attached to those areas of memory, but on steroids, have any of those been corrupted or changed? Because they really shouldn't be. And so that leads us to the first thing is one primary answer. When we find that the integrity has been violated, we're very sure. It really is a binary signal. Your kernel is what you think it is, or it is not. And if it is not, almost always, it means that there's been a compromise on that system, and it needs to not be trusted anymore. There are third-party software out there who can manipulate your kernel that can essentially mean that you're running a custom kernel that could violate its integrity. Most of those we know about, we inform you to say, hey, this is here, but we think that that's okay, that you intended to do that, or you can configure that on or off. I did or did not intend that. But for the most part, if I see a failed status here, it tells me that the system has been compromised. So when I do that, we kind of break the kernel into various sections. I know this is going to get a bit technical and wordy. But when I was exercising, the small bits of the APT that we just showed you and not the whole thing, it goes and looks at different aspects of the kernel and says, is it okay or not? In this particular case, if I look at jump tables, it's telling me, no, this is not okay. This is a bunch of memory that has been corrupted by that rogue rootkit to redirect functionality to it instead of these intended functions. And it's actually telling us where in memory this is happening. So if possible, you can do memory forensics to try to figure it out. And then you can rinse, wash, and repeat that for the other sections. We also have details about things that have happened in your kernel that we've proven that have been happened for a positive reason, but we tell you about them anyways, just in case. So a lot of endpoint protection systems will use F traces, things like that to put markers in the kernel to kind of understand what's going on. And we find those and give those back to you. They're not changing the kernel, but that is somebody in there listening. So we send those down as warnings sometime, and then a bunch of information about it. But despite all of those things, and in fact, this is a bunch of those F traces for the EDR vendor that I'm running on this machine. Again, not to be said who it is, and I don't think you can figure out by the F traces unless you work for that company. But that's exactly what we're doing here. We're saying, hey, this thing is listening to your kernel. It's a little creepy, but maybe you want it to do that. So we let it be there. With that, I think the next place I wanted to go, and I'll stop the screen share and we can just talk here, is let's talk about environments. Linux, Windows, Mac, Android, iOS. Are they all targets, Brian? Some of them targets, some of them more than others. What's your opinion on that? Where we see these most often?
All targets. I would say that, yeah, everything above that you mentioned is a target. Definitely a rise in mobile now too. As that again, that gets tied to an individual with permission and authority and an organization that's essentially being targeted, especially for multi-factor authentication and things of that nature. Linux is still going to be targeted as a persistence vector, as a way to also hide attribution, and then Windows and Mac, yeah, for all of the above. So
And we will find a way to get this to the attendees. There's a very interesting article published by Google, I believe, on an in-memory attack chain of an APT on an Android system. Which that attack chain, very similar to how you might do that on a Linux system and in a few other places as well. But lots of ways for folks to go research out there and be aware and figure out how to protect themselves from there. So we do have a couple questions. Our first question, Bryan, why are we seeing so much reporting of endpoint security being bypassed, and maybe how do we combat that from your perspective?
Yeah. One of the simple truths is anybody can buy these software products, and when these software products are installed in a well-resourced organization, state sponsored or criminal, they're going to test against it. They're going to develop ways of finding workarounds, and then when they land in an organization and they know that product is there, they know how to defeat it. That's one of the problems. Forcing an attacker to be blind is going to be your best way to ensure that they don't have the same ability to work around a security product. And there's a lot of snake oil out there, honestly, too.
Yeah. Interesting feedback we get from our federal partners on, snake oil or not. I do feel like as a community, we're all working together as the good guys, and we should collaborate more. But yeah, just be mindful of sort of what you're getting. And I think the other thing we always like to remind people of is, any organization of any size can be attacked by, something as complex as what we've shown today for reasons that we've said. But, there is a small health system in Kansas that was attacked by a state actor for a considerable amount of ransom. And you would be like, I would not have thought that should have happened, or why, right? And there are lots of reasons to why: money, disruption, all the things we covered at the top. But for most organizations, it's important to know, everybody's a target. It's great to have your active defenses. I do want to say that too. This endpoint software that I'm running on that machine, it is performing a function that is necessary. It's good to put the walls up. It stops most of the stuff from coming through. Same thing for your SIM and your CNAP. Like, we need those things. I was sharing with another group the other day. We had an attack come in from an APAC region recently that was prevented by one of our vendors, on the outside of our network, essentially, sort of a shield before it got into that. So obviously you need all of those. But in a world where zero trust is paramount, your only assumption is that they're going to get in somewhere. You need to make sure you're validating that they're not in and persisting in that organization.
Yeah.
With that, Bryan, I think that wraps up the questions at this point. Any last minute thoughts, comments?
One of the things that I want to specifically highlight on your report, where you had, at the end of it, status failed. I think a key there, right, is when you have that level of compromise, it's difficult to back out and clean up this, that system and whatnot. So really, like, when you see this, I think it's important. It's a critical feature of what you're providing, and what I think defenders need in this kind of situation is that resilient approach, because as everyone's a target and everyone is going to face something like this at some point, the time to detect and how quickly you can mitigate and recover is really the key takeaway. That's really the direction that we need to go. And seeing that, hey, this system is failed, it's lost, you wipe and move on. You back up your data, you wipe and move on. And I think that's the only way that we can approach it, and then the only way that we can really cut the attacker out of the network.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Bryan. Thanks for being here, sharing your experiences with us. And I appreciate everybody who's attended. If you have a question that we didn't get to, or you think of something later, don't hesitate to contact us, info@invary.com. And we hope everybody has a great day. Thanks, everybody.